July 11th, 1976, Edmonton, Canada. That is where and when I was born. My mother is Japanese and my father is American. Both were immigrants to that country. Now, from the time that I was born, they both wanted to make sure that I learned as much about their respective cultures, my respective cultures, as they could possibly teach me. My Japanese mother, she was born in a small town just outside of Tokyo called Kawagoe. Well, she enrolled me in Japanese language courses, which I attended every Friday for almost 10 years. And then my American father, well, he and I would take these long road trips down from Edmonton, Canada, where we live, down through Washington, Oregon, and into California. And all the while, he would tell me about these great stories, about these great men and women who helped shape this great country, the great country of the United States. Now, Edmonton, Canada, during the time that I was growing up, wasn't as culturally a diverse place as it is today, meaning it was largely European in terms of its cultural makeup. Eastern and Western, people from Poland and Ukraine, the United Kingdom, France, Germany. And then sprinkled in amongst them, there were people from other different cultural backgrounds, cultural and ethnic backgrounds. We called these people minorities, essentially, because there was less of them. And then sprinkled in amongst them, there were people like myself, people from two distinct cultural and ethnic backgrounds. In my case, Eastern and Western, Japanese and Canadian. And although no one intentionally excluded me from their groups, I didn't quite feel like I belonged with either of my cultural backgrounds, either my Eastern or my Western. And a lot of the reason is I just didn't quite feel like I saw the world the same as everyone else. And this can be a challenge when you're a young person because all you want to do is fit in. However, as I got older, I started to realize that perhaps not quite seeing the world the same as everybody else wasn't actually a bad thing. In fact, it was a gift. You see, psychologists will tell you that each and every individual, each and every person, well, they look at the world through a unique set of lenses, kind of like contact lenses or glasses. And these lenses essentially are influenced by their cultural background, their life experiences, their education, where they were born. And so some people, while they were looking at the world through perhaps blue and yellow lenses, others green, and others a kaleidoscope of different colors, I realized that I was looking at the world through two distinct cultural lenses, an Eastern and a Western, a Japanese and a North American. As I started to look at my respective cultures through these lenses, as I started to look a little bit more critically into my background, as I tried to learn a little bit more about myself, well, I started to realize that there were certain aspects about each of my respective cultures that I admired and certain things that I perhaps didn't quite admire. For example, on my Japanese side, well, I truly admired their dedication to excellence. No matter what endeavor, no matter what pursuit, no matter what occupation they generally pursued. And then on my American side, well, I truly admired their staunch independence and patriotism. I also began to realize that each of my cultures were shaped over the course of hundreds, if not thousands of years of history, of historical lessons learned through trial and error that helped shape them into the great cultures and nations they ultimately are. And it is one of those lessons that this program is about. Today, East is going to meet West. I'm going to share with you a historical lesson learned by the samurai warriors of ancient Japan over 400 years ago. A lesson that helped them adapt and deal with a challenging time that they faced in their history. And how that lesson of adaptation, of resilience, of getting through adversity can help us today in the world that we live in, the world of COVID. And the lesson is how to use your principles as a compass to navigate through challenging times. I want you to imagine that you are a samurai warrior and you live in ancient Japan over 400 years ago. And now ladies, there were female samurai as well. They were called onna bugeisha. This isn't just about the men. There were women and male samurai, and the women were just as ferocious, if not more. Now as a samurai, your world revolved around essentially two things, two duties. Number one is the dedication to mastery of your particular occupation. And for the samurai, it was to be the best warrior that they possibly could. And therefore, their whole day revolved around training in the martial arts, in horseback riding, in archery, in sword fighting. And their second duty was to dedicate absolute loyalty to their lord. And when I say lord, I'm talking about the local warlord who ran the piece of land, who owned the piece of land, who governed the piece of land that they happened to live on. And that was called a fief. Ancient Japan, at this period of its history, was full of these fiefs all over the place, constantly fighting with each other, constantly in a state of war. So you are a samurai, and your whole world revolves around training, fighting, and showing absolute loyalty and dedication to your lord. And this is how it's been for hundreds of years, hundreds and hundreds of years. This is all you know. This has been what you've been taught from your ancestors, passed down from generation to generation to generation. But imagine if all of a sudden on one day, everything you knew, your whole world, essentially got flipped upside down. And that's essentially what happened to the samurai warriors of ancient Japan on October 21st, 1600. On October 21st, 1600, at the Battle of Sekigahara, the warlord Tokugawa Ieyasu defeated his final warlord rivals, the Toyotomi clan. And in so doing, he essentially brought peace to the land. Now, an important thing to remember is that Japan, during this period of its history, was a virtually completely isolated island nation with virtually no threat of foreign invasion. So here you are, you're a samurai warrior, and your whole world has been around training and fighting, and then all of a sudden there's no more wars. You find yourself and your skills and your occupation a little bit obsolete given the new environment. It's kind of like if you were a downhill skier and someone took away the mountain and the snow. What do? The samurai face a choice. They could either not adapt and essentially just fade into history, completely forgotten, or adapt and take on new skills, new occupations. And that is exactly what they did. They took on new occupations and became tradespeople, craftspeople, artisans, politicians. And in these new professions, they thrived just as much as they did when they were among the greatest warriors history has ever known, the samurai. And a major reason why they were able to thrive is because into these new professions, they took a fundamental aspect of what it was to be samurai, a fundamental aspect of what made them amongst the greatest warriors history has ever known. And that aspect were their principles. And their principles is called Bushido, the way of the warrior. And what Bushido is essentially 7 universal humanistic principles that teach someone how to lead a good life. And they're inspired by Eastern philosophies such as Confucianism and Taoism and Shintoism. And it essentially just serves as a compass around which to make decisions. And then we can use those principles as a guide to help us navigate through these challenging times so that we can thrive and be resilient and come out on the other side stronger than we went into this. Let's get going. The first principle of Bushido is called Kennin. And what Kennin stands for is to cultivate an indomitable spirit. 2.4 mile swim, 112 mile bike, 26.2 mile run. Brag for the rest of your life. Can you take a guess as to what those words stand for or where they come from? Well, those were the words that were written on the back of the race instructions given to the 15 participants of the inaugural Ironman triathlon in 1978. Back in 1978, a commander in the United States Navy by the name of John Collins, well, he was having an argument, a healthy debate, with a bunch of his fellow endurance athletes as to who the best athlete was. Was it the swimmers, the bikers, or the runners? But they couldn't come to a consensus. So what they decided to do is they created a super race that combined each 3 disciplines back to back to back, and the winner, well, they would be called the Ironman. And in order to find inspiration for this event, what they did is they looked for 3 existing races that were going on independently, separately, on the island of Hawaii, and then they combined them back to back to back. So the 2.4 mile swim, well, that was inspired by the Waikiki rough water open water swim, which is essentially 2.4 miles in the rough waters outside of Waikiki, Hawaii. And then the 112 mile bike race, well, that was inspired by the around the island of Oahu long distance bike race, which is 112 miles. And then lastly, the 26.2 mile run, well, that was inspired by the Honolulu Marathon. Now, to put that distance into perspective, I want you to think back to your high school history class. Back when you took a course perhaps on the Peloponnesian War, where the Greeks were fighting the Persians. And back during this war, there was a battle which occurred at this place called Marathon. At the Battle of Marathon, the Greek navy defeated the Persian navy, and upon this victory, what they did is they sent one of their soldiers by the name of Philippides running the distance of 26.2 miles from Marathon all the way to Athens to tell the Greeks that they had won. And when Philippides got to the doors of Athens, he pushed them open, and he puts his hands up and he says, "Yes, we won." Can you guess what happened to him? Well, unfortunately, he died. And that's just to put into perspective how challenging this event is. And all of it is done back to back. And then to make it a little bit more difficult, they put a time limit on it. And that time limit is between 15 and 18 hours, depending on where the race is, because now the races all over the world are held all over the world because of its popularity, and depending on the difficulty of the course, it's between 15 and 18 hours. Ever since 1978, ever since that inaugural Ironman, the best of the best come together back in Hawaii, and they compete in what's called the Ironman World Championships to identify who the best male and female athlete is of that particular year. So I want to take you back to Ironman World Championships 1997. And at this event, there were two women with tremendous kending, tremendous indomitable spirits. One was Cyanne Welch, and the other was Wendy Ingram. And the goal of these women during this event was to become the top female competitors in the Ironman that particular year. So it's a beautiful sunny Hawaii day, and the two women jump into the water and they swim 2.4 miles. Then they jump onto their bicycles and they ride 26.2 miles, moving closer and closer and closer to their goal. Then eventually they hop off those bikes and they strap on the laces of their shoes and they begin the third leg of this three-leg race. And then they start running the 26.2 mile marathon. Things are going incredibly well. Eventually, they get to 100 meters from the finish line. But then, all of a sudden, something completely unexpected happens. Cyanne Welch, who was just slightly in front of her friend Wendy, all of a sudden, her beautiful stride begins to fall apart. And what was once a beautiful stride turns into a stumble, and she collapses onto the ground. And then Wendy Ingram, as if she were Cyanne's conjoined twin, literally at the same spot, a couple moments later, the exact same thing happens to her. Can you take a guess as to what happened to them? The term is called bonked. It's a word that we use in endurance sports to describe that state that occurs when the body, the physical body, runs out of all energy, and then the body just shuts down to save itself, to protect itself. And that's what had happened to both women. They had bonked and they had fallen to the ground. They had no more physical energy left. A few tense moments pass, and then all of a sudden, Wendy Ingram, she digs into a reservoir of energy that exists for anybody who possesses a strong sense of kending, an indomitable spirit, this reservoir of energy that even when you're devoid of physical energy, can power us forward. And she begins to crawl those 100 meters to the finish line. And then Cyanne Welch, possessing just as much kending as her friend Wendy, she too gets onto all fours and she too begins to crawl. And the two women crawl those 100 meters across the finish line, achieve their goal, and enter into Ironman history. Now, as I stood on the side of that road in southern France, feeling sorry for myself, about to give up, while my mind turned to thoughts of people like Cyan and Wendy, people whose example and whose inspiration were part of the reason that I had decided to take on this challenge. And I was once again inspired by them. And so I picked up my bike, dusted off the seat, got back on the proverbial saddle, rode up the rest of the hill and down the other side. Then strapped on my laces and ran, well, let's be honest, I jogged the last 26.2 miles. And in 15 hours and 49 minutes, pretty much dead last, my kending was a little bit stronger. Ladies and gentlemen, we develop our kending, our indomitable spirits, by doing things that are challenging. Ladies and gentlemen, during these times of great uncertainty, great challenge, I challenge you to work on developing your kending, your indomitable spirits. For the times that physically you may be exhausted, mentally you may be exhausted, things may just seem out of control. And you do this simply by identifying goals that you want to achieve, ambitious goals, and then every day taking one step towards it, and moving forward. The second principle of Bushido is called Shinnen, and what Shinnen stands for is to cultivate a strong sense of self, a strong sense of self. Now, a hero is someone who perhaps through their actions, their words, their behaviors, their deeds, inspire us to become a better version of ourselves. They could be a family member, a friend, or perhaps someone we've never ever met before, or even a teacher or a mentor. But whoever they are, they inspire us to be better. I have a hero, and she is a swimmer. I remember back in the 1990s, I used to be a collegiate athlete at Queen's University in Kingston, Canada. I swam and I played water polo. And I very distinctly remember right above my dormitory room door, there was a picture of my hero which I had placed so that anytime I would enter or exit my room, I would look up and I would see their picture and I would be inspired to be the best athlete and the best student that I possibly could be. After my 4-year athletic ended and I moved to Toronto and I became a water polo coach at the University of Toronto, well, I continued to use the story and the example of my hero to help inspire my athletes to become the best version of themselves, the best athletes and the best students that they could be as well. And then after my 4 years in Toronto ended and I moved to Chicago and I started my own personal training company where I continued to use my hero's story and example to inspire my clients to be the best version of themselves as well. Dara Grace Torres was born in Beverly Hills, California in 1967, the fifth of 6 children to Ed and Mary Lou. And I can pretty much guarantee you that no one at the time of her birth would have ever expected that this little girl would someday grow up to become one of this country's greatest Olympic athletes. In 1984, at the Los Angeles Olympic Games, Dara and her teammates in the 4x100 meter relay team brought home gold for the United States. This tremendous accomplishment at such a young age inspired Dara to dedicate herself to the development of her skills, to her chosen discipline, which is the sport of swimming. And this led to countless hundreds upon hundreds of hours of training in the pool, thousands upon thousands of miles of swimming miles logged. And this dedication to excellence paid off because she qualified for 5 more Olympic Games. The most recent being in 2008 in Beijing, China. Can you guess as to how old she was at those games? She was 41 years old. And to put that into perspective, the average age for a female swimmer in the sport of swimming in the Olympic Games is 16. Now the critics, well, they all came out en masse. They said that Dara was too old to swim, to participate in these games, and that she should step aside and let someone younger take her place. But Dara's sense of Shinnen was so strong, her sense of self was so strong that she ignored the critics. She belonged there. She believed that she had done the work, developed the skills to be there. so she ignored the critics. And then the critics did as critics do, and they turned their attention to something else. And they said, well, she's not going to win a single medal. Well, they were right. Dara didn't win a single medal. In fact, she won 3 more Olympic medals that year, adding to a lifetime total of 12. And if that wasn't inspiring enough, Dara did a tremendous thing, and that was she inspired the over 40 crowd the world over that even after the age of 40, the human body can still compete and perform at the highest of levels. Ladies and gentlemen, the samurai believed that cultivating a strong sense of self was critical to navigating the inevitable challenges and obstacles that life will always throw at us. And therefore, how you develop your sinnen, your strong sense of self, is by developing your skills to become master of your discipline, master of your occupation. If you haven't already done so, take inventory of the skills that you are good at, things that you will need in the future in your occupation, things that you will need to remain competitive as the world continues to shift and other skills become obsolete. And then spend time each and every day sharpening those skills as a samurai would sharpen their sword. The third principle of Bushido is called Shincho. And what Shincho stands for is to exhibit good judgment, to exhibit good judgment. In December of 2009, I was sitting on my couch watching television. It was the middle of winter here in Chicago, and the phone rang. On the other end of the line was the owner of a baseball academy in the Dominican Republic. He wanted to see if I would be interested in coming down there, flying down there to work with the athletes and the coaches to help prepare the athletes for Major League Baseball's international draft, which happens every year. Given that this was wintertime in Chicago, this is definitely a no-brainer. So began a 2-year period of my life where I would travel to the Dominican Republic for 1 week out of every month to help train these athletes and work with their coaches. And this is where I met Bienvenido Ramirez. Bienvenido was 15 years old, 6'3" tall, skinny, darker in complexion, but he possessed the gaze of someone who'd seen a lot of hardship in a very short period of life. Bienvenido also had the unique ability to take a baseball with his left hand and throw it over 90 miles an hour over and over and over again, which is a tremendously valuable asset in the sport of baseball. In fact, he was being scouted by several major league teams. However, the thing about Bienvenido is that Bienvenido is illiterate and Bienvenido was born poor. And the Dominican Republic is one of those countries in the world where the social class into which you were born largely dictates the social class into which you will die. That means if you were born poor, you're more than likely going to die poor. The opportunity to change one's circumstances in life that we enjoy here in the West, in the United States and Canada, it doesn't exist for many young people around the world, and the Dominican Republic was one of these places. I want you to imagine or visualize Bienvenido's childhood home. It was essentially 4 walls, corrugated tin roof, dirt floor, bathroom on the outside, virtually no privacy. Both of Bienvenido's parents were subsistence livers, meaning that their whole life just revolved around survival. Now Bienvenido, well, he being a prodigal son, he gave up his education to help support his parents. So he worked for his parents, worked with his parents just to survive. However, Bienvenido, well, he had a dream, and that dream was to become a pelotero profesional, a professional baseball player. And although the probability of this actually happening was so very small, it is just one of the few avenues available to a poor Dominican to change their circumstances and potentially that of their families as well. Now, it was a beautiful sunny Dominican day and Bienvenido was playing pickup baseball on a dirt field just outside of Santiago, which is the second largest city of the Dominican Republic. And these dirt fields where he was playing pickup baseball pocket the landscape of the Dominican Republic, where young people just play whenever they get a chance with cardboard gloves and something that resembles or serves as a ball. And he was playing and a car pulls up and out steps this gentleman by the name of Pineda. And Pineda was the scout for our academy. And Pineda's job is to go from dirt field to dirt field to dirt field, looking for players with potential, recruit them, and then ultimately bring them to our academy. Pineda was so impressed with Bienvenido's natural ability that he recruited them right away and brought him to the academy, threw him right into the mix. And the mix is no joke. It's 8 to 10 hours of physical, mental, and emotional training day in and day out. 6 days a week, week after week, month after month, year after year, until the player gets signed with a professional organization, or as in most cases, unfortunate reality of the situation is that they don't get signed, they get released from the academy and they get sent back home to the humble beginnings from where they came, having perhaps lost the only opportunity they had to change their family's life. Now, when Bienvenido first got to the academy, he really thrived. The regimen of the training, the nutrition that we were able to give him, the resistance training, the education that we were able to give him really helped him advance. But after several months, we started to notice a decline in Bienvenido's performance. He started to always be fatigued. He started to always be lethargic. He couldn't focus. He was tired. And you know, as coaches, we did everything in our power to try to help him. And we gave him training protocols and brought in specialists to help him with his nutrition. But the reality was that Bienvenido's body was breaking down. It hadn't been strong enough to handle the rigors of training. And so, you know, we did what we could. But ultimately, there's only so much that a coach can do. There's a proverbial saying that says, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. And ultimately, Bienvenido's future rested in his own hands. You see, every morning that Bienvenido woke up, he faced a choice. He could exhibit good Shincho, exhibit good judgment, and do everything that the coaches told him to do, that the experts told him to do. Things that we knew would help him build his body back up again, to get it stronger so that it is capable to handle the rigors of training. Or he could exhibit bad Shincho, poor judgment, ignore us and not do anything, and potentially lose out on the only opportunity that he had to change his circumstances. Well, you can imagine what he did. If not, this wouldn't be a very good story. He did everything that we told him to do, everything that the experts told him to do. And his body got stronger. He got mentally more stronger. He got emotionally stronger. And ultimately, he was able to train and rise to the occasion where he was signed by an organization. Now, each and every one of you watching this video, you may not be aspiring professional baseball players. However, you do share something in common with Bienvenido, and that is the vessel by which you achieve your goals, the vessel by which you pursue your dreams, your ambitions, your objectives in life, and that is your body. So each and every morning that you wake up, you face the exact same choice that Bienvenido did. Do you exhibit good Shincho and make decisions that move you towards your goal? Or do you exhibit poor Shincho and make decisions that move you away? Now, it's very easy to talk about this with regards to exercise and nutrition and physical capacity, but good judgment and poor judgment can be applied to so many different aspects of your life. During these challenging times, it's very easy to do things that we find comfortable, that aren't necessarily the right things that move us in the direction that we should be going, that we feel that we need to be going, that move us toward our goals. And it is these times where we have to remember the principle of Shincho, to exhibit good judgment, no matter how difficult it is, and then we are much more likely, you are much more likely to achieve your objective and goals, especially during times of great uncertainty. One of the best ways that you can do this is to keep your goals, your dreams, your ambitions in your mind's eye. And you can do that by writing them on a piece of paper, putting them on a post-it note, writing it on your computer, writing it in your calendar, and putting it somewhere that you can always see them. And when you can see them, and because you can see them, you are much more likely to exhibit good Shincho, good judgment. The fourth principle of Bushido is called sessei. And what sessei means is to seek balance. Now, I used to belong to a business group called Vistage International. And what Vistage is essentially a peer advisory group that brings business owners from different industries together to meet once a month to help each other out. And these meetings are full days, and they allocate 3 hours to a guest speaker, usually around a business-related issue. However, on occasion, we invite health and wellness speakers to talk to us about health and performance because that directly affects business. And I remember distinctly it was our holiday meeting. It was a December time. I think it was 2011 or 2012. We had invited a Canadian physician to come talk to us on stress, specifically how mental stress manifested itself physically. Now, it was Friday. We were on the 97th floor of the Hancock Tower, which is an iconic Chicago building. And on the 97th floor, there's a restaurant called the Signature Room, beautiful restaurant with great views of the lakefront. The staff had taken us to a back room, private room, removed all the general tables, and put in 3 long banquet tables, 2 along the side, 1 along the middle, creating a bit of a horseshoe formation. And the 12 members of my group got there in the morning and were sitting around that table, just catching up, waiting for the speaker to arrive. Around 9:05, the back doors of the room open up and the speaker walks in. And he was about 60 years old, 65 years old, salt and pepper dark hair, wearing a white lab coat. He had a black physician's bag. He looked a little bit as a cross between Mr. Rogers and Bill Nye, the science guy. He walks in, goes to the front of the room and just jumps into his presentation. About half the way through the presentation, he looks at the audience and he says, "Can I have a volunteer?" No one put up their hand. However, within 30 seconds, I was voluntold. I was told that I was to be the volunteer. So I go up to the front and the physician grabs a plastic chair, puts it down in the center of that horseshoe formation, has me sit down in it, and he straps a blood pressure monitor cuff to my arm. And then he looks at me and he says, "Relax, this will be fine." Now, anytime someone tells you to relax, this will be fine, you gotta be a little bit suspicious. He then proceeds to take my blood pressure. And all I can say is that I was very happy to know that I had good blood pressure. He then asked the members of my group for the next minute to just say as many mean things as they possibly could to me. Anything that they wanted to say. And they asked me just to keep my mouth, and he asked me just to keep my mouth shut, try to be as calm and as zen as possible, and just do that. He said, "Ready, go." And for 60 seconds, my peers, my friends, turned into a schoolyard mob. And they said things like, "Oh, you bring nothing of value to this group. Why are you even here? You dress funny," all sorts of horrible, horrible things. I remained completely quiet, completely calm. After 60 seconds, the good doctor takes my blood pressure again. And what do you think happened? My blood pressure had shot through the roof. But I had not physically moved. The mental stress that I was getting from the people saying horrible things to me had manifested itself into a physical stress. And it was shown in the increase in my blood pressure. The samurai knew how important it was to seek emotional, physical, and mental balance, and how much damage it can cause to you, to your performance, to your ability to do the things that you wanted, to be effective if you are out of balance. And so it is so crucial that in all aspects of your life, seek out balance. And in order to do this, you first need to identify where in your life you're out of balance. Are you more sedentary than you are active? Are you giving more love than are you receiving? Are you working more than you are spending time with your family? Are you talking more than you're listening? Are you eating more bad foods versus good foods? Whatever it might be, wherever you are out of balance, that can cause you harm and derail you and make it harder to thrive during challenging times. Seek balance. The fifth principle of Bushido is called seigi. And what seigi means is to possess a strong sense of justice. From the time that I was a little boy, my father always wanted to make sure that I was aware of what was going on in the world beyond the walls of my home, beyond the walls of my city, beyond the walls of my country. And the reason why he thought it was so important is because he always wanted me to know. He thought it was important for me to know that what happens elsewhere in the world somehow will always impact us in some fashion. And so it was important to become worldly. From the time that I was very young, my father would give me magazine articles from The Economist, from Forbes, from other international newspapers with dog-eared pages where they're bent, or paragraphs or important information highlighted for me to read. And then when I got older and I left the home and I went out to college, I would receive these care packages, and inside these care packages were the same magazines, the same newspapers with the pages dog-eared and the important sections highlighted. And then after I left college and I entered into the professional workforce and I was able to afford my own subscriptions, well, I continued the habits that my father had instilled in me about following what was going on in the world. Recently, I've been seeing a trend that has been going on in the world. Perhaps you've begun to see them yourself. I'm going to name a few countries here. Perhaps you can see the connection. The Ukraine, Syria, Yemen, Egypt, Thailand, Venezuela. What comes to mind? Civil unrest. In each of these countries, there is civil unrest that is occurring because there are people who, because they have sensed a huge sense of injustice, whether it's political, economic, or social, felt that they could no longer be quiet. They could no longer go quietly into the night. And they stood up and they wanted their voice to be heard. And sometimes and often they put their bodies in the line and on the line. And when they do this, they demonstrate what seigi is. It is possessing a strong sense of justice, a strong sense of personal responsibility, of the difference between wrong and right. And because it's so strong and so profound in them, they're willing to stand up and put their bodies and their convictions in harm's way. Now, your life may not involve civil unrest, but perhaps in your workplace, in your community, in your towns, there are situations that you see that are unjust, where perhaps morality and what's good and what's wrong is being blurred, and you feel a tremendous sense of despair, or perhaps a need to do something. And what possessing a strong sense of seigi does is it gives you the push and the drive and the guidance to do what is right. Maybe it's standing up for bullying. Maybe it's for standing up for somebody who is not able to stand up for themselves. Maybe it's standing up for the environment. Maybe it is standing up for your community. Whatever it is, do it, because that will make you feel a strong sense of seigi and a strong sense of being morally right. The sixth principle of Bushido is called Jizen, and what Jizen means is to be benevolent, to essentially practice kindness, help others. Not too long ago, I was at a Kinko's Copies making some copies for a motivational talk that I was giving to a group of insurance professionals. When I was there, the person working on the other end of the counter engaged me in conversation. His name was Gabriel. He asked me what the program was for, and I said, well, it's a motivational talk. And then to my surprise, Gabriel then responded by saying, well, he should be a motivational speaker. And I said, okay, Gabriel, why is that? Why would you want to do this? And then Gabriel proceeded to tell me about his background. You see, Gabriel comes from a part of Chicago that I have never been to, and I may never ever go to in my life, and an area that many people will never go to. It's a rougher part of the city. And he said that in that area, there aren't a lot of mentors, a lot of role models for young people to look to help them lead a good life, to inspire them. And so he found himself all the time seeking to help those young people, because his story was that he had spent his entire life trying to lead a good life, trying to avoid a lot of the vices that some environments can provide. He said to avoid jail, that was his goal. And then now, as an adult, working at the FedEx Kinko's, he feels that he was successful. And now his role, or his dream and his drive, his mission, is to ensure that he teaches his son to lead a good life as well as the peers of his son, the friends of his sons, other young people in his community. And so he finds himself always giving talks and sharing insights about how he was able to avoid a lot of the negative influences that surrounded him. And what made Gabriel's story so powerful was the reminder of the importance of being benevolent, of being kind, of helping, of giving. And oftentimes when we think about giving, we think about monetary or products or things along those lines, giving things. But to be benevolent, you don't have to give money, you don't have to give things. You can give your expertise, you can give your wisdom, you can give things that perhaps are a little less tangible, but at the same time, equally, if not more valuable to others. You see, the samurai knew how important benevolent was. They believed that it was the responsibility of people to help others. In order to cultivate your Jizen, your benevolence, I challenge you to look just in your neighborhood. Is there an opportunity for you to be a mentor, an opportunity to share your wisdom and your life experiences to others, to young people, to fellow people your own age, whoever they might be, just simply to share and to help. And what you will realize in the process of helping others, you will feel awesome. You will feel great. Not only will you be helping others, but you ultimately end up helping yourself. And that boost in confidence, that boost in esteem will help you endure all the negativity and a lot of the challenges and despair that can often kind of seep into our lives during challenging times like we are going through now. The seventh principle of Bushido is called Kibo. And this is arguably the most important of all the principles. And Kibo means to maintain hope, to have hope for the future. During the Second World War, both of my grandfathers were involved. On my Japanese side, my grandfather Hiroshi, at the beginning of the war, he was flying supply missions all around the islands of the South Pacific. However, towards the end of the war, as the war ceased to be going in Japan's favor, he ended up training kamikaze pilots on how to fly a one-way mission against the encroaching American fleet. Now, on the other side of the Pacific, at the onset of the war, when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, my paternal grandfather, Robert, like many young patriotic men and women of his generation, joined the military. My grandfather joined the fabled 82nd Airborne, became a paratrooper, and he jumped into Europe and Africa and fought all over and all through the war. Fortunately, both of my grandparents survived the war. My Japanese grandfather, well, he went back to Japan, married his childhood sweetheart, and had 3 children. And then my paternal grandfather, Robert, he went back to Los Angeles after stopping off in England and marrying his war bride, Brenda. He went back to Los Angeles and started his own business and had 2 children. About 20 years later, one of Hiroshi's children, Akiko, my mother, flew from Tokyo all the way to Los Angeles to attend school. And then at the same time, one of Robert's sons, Dudley, attended the same school. They met, fell in love, got married, and moved to Edmonton, Canada, where they had me. And then sometime in the mid to late 1970s, I was too young to remember it, my Japanese grandfather flew from Japan to our family home in Edmonton, and then my American grandfather drove up from California, and my 2 grandparents met for the very first time. 2 people who had, in a previous life almost, been adversaries. And they met in our family home in Edmonton. And although they did not speak the same language, it is my belief that when they saw each other and they were with their children. They were both filled with a tremendous sense of Kibo, a strong sense of hope for the future, that myself and my generation and all future generations will not have to go through the same trials and tribulations that their generations did. Ladies and gentlemen, possessing a strong sense of Kibo during challenging times, a strong sense of hope that the future will be better, is a powerful way to ensure that you can weather the tough times. As I come to a close, I want to leave you with this last little story. Right before the pandemic hit, I was at a Barnes & Noble bookstore, just in the sports section, perusing the different books that were there. And I came across this one book called Yoko Jun. And what Yoko Jun is a book that was written by a samurai physician right after the Battle of Sekigahara, about 20 years after the Battle of Sekigahara. And it was a book all about how to be healthy and how to lead a good life. And the reason why the author of this, his name was Kaibara Ekiken, he wrote the book, was that he felt that the samurai in their new profession were getting a little softer, meaning that because they weren't as vigorous, they weren't as active, their bodies were getting a little softer because they were just perhaps living in a little bit more comfort. And so he wrote this 220-page treatise, or essentially it's a book. And after reading it all, I can tell you that it sums up into basically 3 general concepts, right? Eat well, get lots of movement, and rest. Sound pretty familiar? You're absolutely right, because it's the exact same information that the modern day health and wellness gurus are telling us to do today. And the reason why I share this with you is just to point out the fact that history has a tendency to always repeat itself. And so if we just keep our eyes and our ears open to the past, we can learn from the lessons of the people who have come before us and then apply those lessons to our own lives. So A, we don't have to go through the same mistakes they did, but at the very least, we can make sure that our decisions are made based on their experiences. And we don't have to go through the same challenges that they did. 400 years ago, the samurai warriors of ancient Japan faced their own uncertainties, faced their own challenges in an uncertain world full of trials and tribulations. Today, as you face your own challenges, your own tribulations, as you look to navigate through this post-pandemic world, I challenge you to use the principles of Bushido as a compass to help guide you, make your decisions, to help you navigate, to help you become more resilient to the uncertainties that you face now and you will inevitably face in the future.